Topics in demand and supply analysis. This is our next reading, and of course the agenda for today. It's a relatively easier reading, and I'm sure most of the areas in this reading you would have covered in your undergraduate economics. So let's see, what do we have. The first LOS says, calculate and interpret the price, income and cross price elasticity of demand and describe the factors that affect each measure. Okay, now first, what is price elasticity? Price elasticity basically measures the degree of responsiveness of change in demand with change in price. If the price changes, it will affect demand, but to what extent? If the price goes up, we know law of demand from our basic studies. If the price increases, the quantity demanded will fall, and vice versa. If price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. But not all items will see the decrease or increase in price by the same proportion. For some items, the increase in price would see a very little decrease in demand. But for the other items, the slightest change in price could cause a large decrease in quantity demanded. So, to what extent the demand would change with the change in price, this is what we measure by price elasticity of demand. So, the formula we use is the percentage change in quantity demanded upon percentage change in price, and if expanded, it could be written in this way, and you will do some questions where we'll rearrange this formula into P upon Q multiplied by change in quantity upon change in price. So this is how we calculate the price elasticity of demand. It can have three different possible results, assuming that we ignore the negative sign, because we know there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So the price elasticity would be negative, but ignoring the negative sign, taking the absolute number, if price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, then we say that the quantity demanded is relatively elastic with regard to price. If the price elasticity of demand is less than 1, that means relatively inelastic. And if the price elasticity of demand is equal to 1, the absolute measure, in that case we call it unitary elastic. Now let us just, I try to give it how would it work. Without number, let me show how it works. Let's say if the price increases and quantity demanded by a greater proportion, this indicates that the demand is more elastic. A slight change in price can cause more swing in quantity demanded, and talking in the reverse order, a decrease in price will cause the quantity demanded to go up. So this is what you mean by having a relatively elastic demand. When you say price elasticity is less than 1, so in that case, an increase in price would see a little decrease in demand, or a decrease in price will cause a little increase in demand. So you can see the change in demand with regard to change in price is comparatively low. So this is called relatively inelastic. Whereas in this case, which you call the unitary elastic, in this case, if the price increases, of course, quantity demanded will fall. And if the price decreases, the quantity demanded will increase. But it in such a way that the total revenue here would be the same as total revenue here. So change in price will basically cause no change in total revenue. Yes, quantity demanded will fall. Yes, with decrease in price, quantity demanded would increase, but the total revenue would stay the same. Now let us just try to plug this in to find some elasticities. Let's take some items and see how their price is affected. Let's say take chicken. Let's say right now the price of chicken at P1 point in time is let's say 300 PKR. That's my local currency. At this price, my monthly quantity demanded, let's say, is 20 kg. Right? When the price is increased from 300 to 350, let's say, my quantity demanded fell to just 5 kg. Now I would like to measure the price elasticity demand for chicken. So what I will do, simply plug in the numbers here. So as you can see, the Change in quantity is 15, yes. The original quantity was 20. The original price was 300 divided with the change in price, that was 50. So if you simplify this all, it's going to be 15 by 20 times 300 upon 50 multiplied by 100. 15 by 20 multiplied by 300 divided by 50. It's 4.5. So as you can see, it is greater than 1. So it is elastic, and we can also do some alternative computations. This one, the percentage change in price is 50 upon 300. So that gives you 16.67%. So the price has gone up by 16.67%. Quantity demanded has fallen by 15 kg. So 15 by 20 is 75%. So you can see that there has been just 16.67% increase in the price, whereas the quantity demanded has fallen by 75%. So indicating that the demand has fallen disproportionately by a greater extent. So if you plug in these numbers here, 75 upon 16.67, you will get the same result, 75 by 16.66. So you got exactly the same result, 4.5. So this shows an elastic demand. Okay, now let's see an example where we have a relatively inelastic demand. Let's say talk about something I love. Let's say right now the price of mutton is about 1400 PKR per kg. That's the price. And right now my quantity demanded Q1 is around 10 kg for the month. Now if price goes up to a new level of, let's say, 1600, my quantity demanded will see a decrease, but comparatively less, maybe 9.5. I love mutton. I won't decrease my consumption. Now let's do the way we do with the based on percentage. Here the change has been 200 based upon 1400 times 100. So the increase in price has been 14.28%. This is the increase in price. And it has caused a reduction in the quantity demanded by what percentage? Just 5%. So as you can see, there has been an increase in price, but the quantity demanded has just fallen by a very little, just 5%. So just plug in these numbers here. You will see the quantity demanded has fallen by 5%. The change in price is 14.28. You can alternatively do this way. So it's going to be 5 by 14.28. It is just 0.35, which clearly is less than 1. So this shows that it is relatively inelastic. So it's more or less my necessity. Right? So this is what you call the price elasticity to demand. So what does it tell me? And what does it tell you? That I hate chicken. If the price goes up, I'll simply avoid chicken. But for mutton, when the price goes up, I will reduce my consumption, but to a lesser extent. You can just see here. So it means more or less this is something I like, where chicken is something that I do not like. So that's the idea. Let's now do it from another aspect, that the price elasticity. Let's do this from another aspect called the income elasticity. So just like we have simply replaced, the denominator has now been replaced with income. Now it measures how would the change in quantity demanded would be influenced by the changes in income. Like if my income goes up, to what extent my quantity demanded goes up, or to what extent my quantity demanded may go down. So income elasticity measures the responsiveness of the quantity demanded with the changes in income level. Right? So normally when your income level rises, you start purchasing certain items in greater quantity, but not with the same proportion. Some items you start buying more in quantity, but some it less. Right? So that's the idea. Now if the goods are normal, when my income goes up, my quantity demanded will also go up. But to what extent, it can be calculated using this formula. Right? It can also happen that if my income goes up, my quantity demanded, instead of going up, it starts going down. I start buying less of it. Why would it be so? Probably just because I have a higher income level. So instead of purchasing this item X, I have now substituted my spending for another item Y, and I've started buying less of quantity demanded. Now just take the example. Let's say if my income goes up, I will start purchasing more mutton, and I will reduce my spending on chicken because I hate chicken. This is a bad food. I consider it to be bad food. Maybe some people love it, but I don't like chicken. I love mutton. So this could be, if my income goes up, I start purchasing more mutton and start buying less chicken. So for me, this is normal good, and this is then the inferior good. Okay, that's the idea of income elasticity. There is another idea, and of course this should have been changed. It is cross price elasticity. What does it measure? The cross price elasticity, it measures the change in quantity demanded of product X with the change in price of Y. Previously it was different. It was on price elasticity, the change in quantity demanded of product X with the change in price of X, right? But here, why it's cross? Because the change in the quantity demanded of X with the change in price of Y. This is what you call the cross elasticity. What does it measure? Let's take some hypothetical numbers. Let's consider right now the price of Pepsi, because they're very close substitutes. So the price of Pepsi is rupees 50, right? At this price, I purchase quantity of Pepsi, let's say 100 cans in a month, right? Okay. At the same time, we also have Coke, and it is almost priced at the same level, rupees 50. I don't buy it currently. Now what happens if the price of Pepsi goes up from 50 to 55, right? What will happen? I will shift my spending from Pepsi to Coke. I'll start purchasing Coke, right? So this is what cross elasticity measures, that what would be the change in the quantity demanded if the change in price is made in another substitute goods, right? It could happen this way, that maybe I was purchasing Coke originally, but if the price of Pepsi falls to 45, I will switch my spending towards Pepsi. So this could be the other way around. So the important point here to note that when the price of Pepsi goes up, the quantity demanded of Coke will go up. I will switch my spending here, right? So there is no change in the price of Coke, but since the price of Pepsi has gone up, I will switch my spending from Pepsi to Coke. These are for substitute goods. So when item is another substitute, so when the price of one item goes up, the people will switch their spending for a substitute. So remember, they move in the same direction. So the cross price elasticity for substitutes is positive, means if the price of Pepsi goes up, the quantity demanded of Coke goes up. If the price of Pepsi goes down, that means the quantity demanded of Coke will go down. So they move in the same direction. That's why the number that you will calculate here for cross price elasticity would be positive. But this would not be true if the products are complementary. If two items that are complementary, for example, that's the conventional example we have been giving and we have been told way back in our undergraduate classes. Bread and butter, they are complementary products. Means they are jointly demanded. Substitute are one for another, but complementaries are demanded together. Bread and butter, they have the joint demand. Now, what happens here? If the price of bread goes up, of course, the quantity demanded for bread will fall. Since the quantity demanded for bread will fall, the quantity demanded for butter will fall as well. Why? Because bread and butter, they are jointly demanded. So in this case, what kind of relationship do you see? You see an inverse relationship between the price of bread and the quantity demanded of butter. So remember, the cross price elasticity for complementary goods, it would be negative. That's an important point to be remembered. So this is what we have learned so far regarding the price elasticity, income elasticity, and cross price elasticity, and we have also discussed some factors that affect them. Next, we have compare the substitution and income effect. All right. Substitution effect. When the price increases, let's say we have a good X, its price increases. Because of increase in price of X, people will shift their spending to another product Y, and the demand for product Y starts going up. This is called substitution effect. Price increase in X has caused a substitution, and the quantity demanded of Y has gone up. Right? And what about the income effect then? Income effect means when your income is increased, or when income goes up, it will result in more goods being bought. Quantity demanded, normal goods, they will go up. Increase in income will cause the increase in demand for the normal goods. That's what you call simple substitution effect and income effect. Right? Because the price of X goes up, it will affect another product quantity demanded Y. But if income goes up, a certain item that you buy, you start purchasing in more quantity. So this is what results in income effect. Substitution effect, income effect explained. Gentlemen, I always emphasize, especially on the areas that we have special expertise on, CMA. We strongly believe in learning outcome statements, because if you are able to grasp the essence of every learning outcome statement, you are up to the level expected of the examiner, and now you're on your way to qualify that particular certification. Same is true for CIA, same is true for CFA as well. So as long as you have a proper grip on every LOS, you are able to comprehend and being able to satisfy the examiner, you are on your way to success. So just make sure there is no need for doing complexities unless it is required by the LOS. Your boundary should be the command words in the learning outcome statement. Compare, and that's what you have done just now. Next is distinguish between normal and inferior goods. We just need to learn the difference between them, what they are. Very simple. Normal goods are those goods whose demand increases when our income goes up. When our income increases, we start buying more of such goods. So such goods are called normal goods. Right? Clothing, maybe, food stuff, good quality food. So when the income goes up, you start purchasing more quantity of those goods. So such items are called normal goods. Such goods are called normal goods. But to the other hand, inferior goods, as the name suggests, when your income increases, you start buying less of such goods. Rather, you switch your expense somewhere else. So inferior goods are those for whom your quantity demanded will fall when your income increases. Because when you become richer, just like I will take the example, when I start earning more, I will switch my spending from chicken to mutton. So I find chicken to be an inferior good. Right? So that's the basic difference. That your income determines how much you will consume. If your income goes up, you start purchasing more of your normal goods, but when the income increases, you start buying less of another good. That other good which you are just avoiding, they are called inferior goods. That's the distinction, and you have distinguished it nicely. So you just focus on the learning outcome statement. As long as you are able to fulfill the LOS requirement, you're good to go. Okay, next, yes, there are some special cases here. Giffen goods are special inferior goods. Normally what we have just discussed, that when income goes up, the quantity demanded for a certain goods go down, that item is called inferior good. But Giffen goods are special inferior goods which have a positive relationship with price. When the price goes up, you start purchasing more of these goods, even they are inferior. Even if they are inferior, why? You have started purchasing more because they do not have any good substitute. So even they are your income level goes up, you start purchasing more of them. So such inferior goods, when the price rises, you even start purchasing more of such quantity. Why? The reason is because there are no obvious substitutes for such an item. These items are very rare. Just maybe you will find some old historical example of rice in China, probably, that the price goes up, people start purchasing more of those items because there are no substitute for that. So such items are called Giffen goods. And then other Veblen goods, they are normal goods. They are not inferior. Giffen goods are considered inferior goods, whereas Veblen goods are normal goods. They are special in this way that when their price increases, you start purchasing more of them. Now, why would you do that? When the price increases, normally we buy less, but here, when the price goes up, the quantity demand in this case upward sloping, you start purchasing more. Why? Because these items are sometimes show the wealth you have. Most of them are the status symbol, like having a Mercedes or a BMW, or maybe having a latest iPhone, right? Or maybe having expensive luxury jewelry. So these goods are Veblen. When the price goes up, we start purchasing more of them. So this is what you call a special normal good. Okay, the next learning outcome statement says describe the phenomenon of diminishing marginal return. Okay, before we describe special focus must be on the action verbs. Okay, marginal returns. Let's first discuss marginal returns. Marginal return means that when we increase our input, we should expect an increase in output. When you say input, input could be labor, input could be capital. So by increasing your input, we expect a higher output, right? So when you increase 1 unit of input, your output right now is, let's say, 100. When your input is increased from 1 to 2, your output goes up to 150. Now this 50 here represents your marginal return. Increasing your input by 1 unit has caused an increase of 50 in your output. So this is what you call the marginal return. Okay, that makes sense. And let's say if we increase an input by 1 more unit, your output goes up to 170. Now the marginal return is 20. Now when you say diminishing, this is shown right here. As you increase from unit 1 to 2, output increase by 50, but when an additional input was raised, but the output rose only by 20 instead of previous 50. Now the increase is diminishing. We can interpret this with the help of a typical classical example that my teachers gave me way back 23 years ago, or even longer, maybe 24 years ago. And the same example I will give you. When you eat first single chocolate, let's say Mars, you will feel good. When you have another Mars, well, you will feel okay. But third Mars, you will feel nauseated, uneasy. 3 Mars in a single go, that would be very, of course, unenjoyable. So that won't be something that you will feel good about. So first you felt good, then okay, then it starts. So this is the idea of diminishing marginal return, and let me explain this with the help of the table. Now this is the output. When the first labor was input, output was 10. When we added another labor, output rose to 25 thereby. This is the marginal return. An additional worker brought in for the 20. So as you can see, we are increasing our number of input labor, but output is increasing, but diminishingly. Output is increasing, but in a diminishing fashion. This is the curve that will show. Your output, your returns are increasing, but diminishing. First it rose by 15, 10, then it's now started falling. It initially rose then, but it started falling. So this region where it's now falling, this is what you call, here we have increasing returns, but this region here, we are having decreasing returns. Now, what would be the justification? Why has it happened? Why the increase in number of labor has not caused an increase, a constant increase, or an increasing increase in the marginal product labor? The reason being that in the short run, at least, our fixed capital doesn't change. So just adding on more workers will not increase your output increasingly. Just take an example that you have a ladder, and we use that ladder to pick apples in an orchard. So if you hire one worker, you get these many apples. You hire two, the output goes up. So firstly, you will see some increasing returns. But when there are 6 laborers on the same ladder, your output will start decreasing. And look at this. When you added the 6th worker, he was able to increase your output by just 4. So when the capital is fixed, so this is what you will see, the marginal return. Every additional input will result in a lower output. That completes this LOS. Now, moving on. Determine and describe the break-even and the shutdown points of marginal returns. I'm sure you would have studied in your earlier accountancy and management accounting. The break-even point is the point where your total revenue is equal to your total cost. When the revenue and cost are equal, which means your total revenue minus total cost, they give you a 0, which means there is no profit. Profit is this. That's what you call break-even. When the cost and revenue are the same, there is no profit. This is what you call a break-even point. So ideally, business should make some profit, but at least the business should break even. If there is no profit, at least there should be no loss. That's the idea of breakdown, break-even. Now, next is shutdown points. Shutdown points mean the point where you should close your business. What does it mean now? Let's see. Right now, my total revenue is $10,000 and my total cost is $12,000, right? Apparently, it looks like that this is not good. My total revenue is less, my total cost is more. There's a loss, I should close down. No, it's not as simple as it looks. We need to see how our cost is built up. Out of this 12,000, 8,000 represents your variable cost that varies with the level of output and sales, and 4,000 represents your fixed cost. Since fixed cost doesn't change in the short run, at least in the short run, I should be able to generate the revenue that is more than my variable cost, total variable cost. Here, I am perfectly fitting in the arrangement. My total revenue is greater than the total variable cost. So at least in the short run, I should carry on. At least my variable costs are covered and I'm getting some extra revenue to cover some of my fixed cost. So as long as your total revenue is more than total variable cost, in the short run, you should carry on. But this is not sustainable. For how long can you sustain? For how long can you go when you are not able to cover your total cost of 12,000? So at least in the short run, fine. But it is not sustainable in the long run. If it goes on and on in the long run, you have to shut down. So if your total revenue is greater than total variable cost, carry on in the short run, close down in the long run. But if your total revenue, it is less than variable cost, you are not able to cover your variable cost, close, shut down even in the short run, and there is no question for the long run. If you are not able to cover your variable cost in the short run, there is no justification for running such a terrible business. Close down, shut down. So that's the point to remember. If total revenue is more than total variable cost, at least carry on in the short run, but shut down in the long run if it goes on. But if the total revenue is less than total variable cost, short run, close down. And there is no point in extending such a terrible business into the future. Alrighty, then what we have is a beautiful learning outcome statement. Lovely. Describe how economies of scale and diseconomies of scale affect costs. Okay, what are economies of scale? Economies of scale means when a business becomes large or when the output is increased. Because of increase in output, you are able to spread out your cost of production on a larger number of units. Resultantly, your average cost starts falling. This is called economies of scale. When you increase your output, your average cost starts falling. This is good for the business, right? Now, we would like to know what causes that. What causes this increase in scale, increase in output? What causes the average cost to fall? There has to be some justification. Let us discuss some economies of scale. First and foremost is what you call the purchasing economies of scale. When you buy in bulk, because you need to produce more, buying more in quantity, it will attract bulk purchasing discounts. So because of discounts, your cost of purchase will fall. This will reduce your cost of production. Hence, your average cost will fall. So buying in bulk will reduce your purchasing cost, hence your average cost. This is called purchasing economies of scale. Then, since you are a larger business, you can afford to purchase expensive machinery. This expensive machinery is able to produce more units and is more efficient, takes in less electricity. Resultantly, because of higher output, you are able to distribute the cost on a larger number of units, so your average cost falls. This is called technical economies of scale. Third, you're a large business. You can appoint professional managers, qualified CFAs, qualified chartered accountants, qualified ACCAs, CPAs, Harvard graduates, competent people who are good at their work. Maybe they cost more, but they will be able to run the business more efficiently. And this efficiency will be reflected in the form of reduction in your average cost. This is called managerial economies of scale. Competent managers can reduce your average cost. And there are so many other things as well. Risk-bearing economy of scale, you're able to spread your risk on a larger number of units, your average cost fall. Then you have the marketing economy of scale, you're able to use your distribution network to sell out larger number of units and your cost falls, and so on and so forth. And yes, one more, we can't, as a financial analyst, we must not forget that. And I should put it at the top. I should put it at the top. Financial economies of scale. We cannot, this is a sin to forget this. Financial economies of scale. Since you are a large business, when you go to the banker, when banker sees your sheer size, he will offer you the credit lines at the lower interest rates. Why? Because you are a better big size customers and the default risk is low. So the banks will charge low interest rate. This lower cost of borrowing would reduce your overall cost, and hence your overall cost per unit will fall. This is called the financial economies of scale. Right? They are all internal, but there are some external economies of scale as well. Maybe where you are located, there are many similar businesses, and such businesses, they have built up the infrastructure there so as to support each other. This would result in more efficiencies, so the cost could fall. Then there are diseconomies of scale. Now there are always two sides to the coin. This is the good side, and let me show you the ugly side. When the business becomes larger, it becomes difficult to control because of the sheer size or complexity. This would result in inefficiency, so average cost starts going up. When you have a larger business, there would be communication problems between the senior and junior managers. Probably your low-level staff, the factory floor workers, they might feel that they are far away from the senior management. They will feel alienated, they will feel depressed, they will feel sad, they will feel that they are small cog in a big machine. They will feel unhappy. They will feel that they are insignificant. And I'm telling you from fact, I've seen some people where I worked, they felt so bad because they were far away from the organizational hierarchy. In a large business, factory floor workers, they feel depressed because they think they are unimportant. And this feeling would reflect in their work efficiency, hence lower output or substandard output will cause your average cost to go up. This is called, what do you call that? This is the diseconomy scale because of communication issues, so because of workers' alienation or workers' dissatisfaction. Moreover, in the larger business, management starts empire building. There would be what you call the political warfare between different departments, purchasing, sales. I'm talking from practical aspect where I worked. Purchasing, sales, marketing, finance, human resource. These are all powerful people within the organization, departmental heads of these different functions. They start a political warfare between them, fighting for limited resources, what you call the empire building. Ideally, they should work like a team, but they fight. Most of the cases, I've worked in many companies, and interestingly, this fight is common everywhere. Departmental heads, instead of working like a team, they fight. They fight for resources. They fight for dominance. So this is not good for the firm. This will cause hindrance, and resultantly, this inefficiency will be reflected in the form of higher average cost. So this is what you call the diseconomies of scale, gentlemen. So that's what we have covered. What are economies of scale? Internal and external and diseconomies, all covered. So this is nicely reflected in this figure here. This area here, where average cost is falling with the increase in size of your output, this is what you call the economies of scale. But right after this optimum point, your average cost is going up. This region is diseconomies of scale. This region is economies of scale. Right? So optimum point is that we need to reach Q1, and where the output level would be at a very nice level or at a right point. Okay, now let's do a question. The question says a demand function for gasoline is given by quantity demanded for gas is 138,500 minus 12,500 price of gas. So this is the demand function dependent upon the price of gas. Now we need to calculate the price elasticity at a gasoline price of 3 per gallon. Now what we do? First of all, look at the function given. Let me write it in a simplified form. QD is equal to 138,500 minus 12,500 price. Okay. Now let's plug in the price. Put 3 here. 138,500 minus 12,500 times 3. Its simplification would give you 101. Okay. Now we want to calculate the price elasticity of demand, sometimes referred to as PED, and we know it's equal to percentage change in quantity demanded upon percentage change in price, and we also know that it can be written as price upon quantity multiplied by change in price, a change in quantity upon change in price. That's the other way of writing the formula. So gentlemen, what do we have here? We have the price, that is 3, and we have the quantity demanded at this price, that is 101. What are we looking for? The price elasticity of demand at this particular price. So price is 3, quantity demanded is 101,000. What we are looking for is delta Q by P. And what is delta Q by P? Just look at the demand function. What you see as a prefix of P is in fact the gradient of this line. That's what you call the gradient, and which you need to plug in here as delta Q by P, and that will give you the elasticity of demand. So I'm just going to replace it, 3 by 101,000, and this negative sign indicates that the quantity demanded and the price, they are negatively linked. That is, the result would be negative. So I'm going to plug in the negative number as well, 12,500. So when you simplify this, this should give you the result negative 0.37. First of all, the negative sign indicates that the price and quantity demanded, they are negatively related as per the law of demand, and this absolute amount, if this negative sign is removed, is less than 1. So how do we interpret this? We interpret this that at this price, the price elasticity demand is 0.37, if there is 1% change in price, it will cause the quantity demanded to fall, but just by 0.37%. A 1% increase in price has caused a little decrease in quantity demanded. Thereby, it shows that the demand at level $3 is relatively inelastic. Okay, now let's do a little challenging one. This one a little challenging. Now let's just try to interpret this function first and then see how these different elements are linked. An individual has the following demand function for gasoline. The quantity demanded for gasoline is 15 minus 3p. That's the price of gas, plus 0.02i, that is the income, plus 0.11 price of BT here I think stands for bus travel, and P is the price of auto. Okay, now let's first try to interpret this function. Does it make sense to us? Yes, it does. Look at the quantity demanded in price. They have a negative. It means absolutely we agree. When price goes up, the quantity demanded falls. So there has to be a negative relationship between them. All right, then what? What about income and quantity demanded of gas? When your income goes up, you purchase more gasoline. Your quantity demanded of gas will go up. So it is nicely shown by a positive sign. Right? Now at the same time, look at this. The price of bus travel. If the price of bus travel goes up, you find bus travel expensive, then you will start purchasing gas for your car, so quantity demanded for gas goes up. Right? So this plus sign means that the price of bus travel is positively linked with the quantity demanded of gas. If the price of bus travel falls, then I won't buy as much gas because I will prefer the bus travel. Right? And then the same relationship with the price of auto. That is, the price of auto goes up, then it will have a negative relationship with the quantity demanded. All right, now let's see what the question requires. Where the income and car price are measured in thousands and the price of bus travel is measured in average dollar per 100 miles. Remember, the price of auto means the price of car. When the price of car goes up, people will buy less cars, hence the quantity demanded of gasoline will fall. So the function makes full sense now. Now, what do we need? And the price of the bus travel is measured in average dollars per 100 miles. So these are the inputs. Assuming the average automobile price is 22,000, income is 40,000. Remember, we need to remove these thousands because the numbers are to be plugged without the thousand sign, without the three zeros. The price of the bus travel is 25. And the price of gasoline is $3. Calculate and interpret the income elasticity of gasoline and the cross price elasticity of gasoline. Now this is what we have to do. So it will take some time, but the idea must be conveyed, and then after that this reading is going to be over. Okay, first let's write down the function. It's 15, and let's find what exactly are we looking for. We are looking for first the income elasticity of demand. So basically the percentage change in quantity demanded upon the percentage change in income. That's what we need. And then the second part, I think, is about the cross elasticity with what? The cross elasticity of gasoline demand with respect to the price of bus travel. So that's delta change in percentage change in Q upon the percentage change in the price of bus travel. So that's what we are looking for. So good question. All right, let's do the first part first. Let's write down the full function. The function is QD is equal to 15, and at the same time keep replacing the numbers with whatever is given. So the price of gas is given as 3. So I'm going to replace price gas with 3 plus 0.02. And since we just want to find first for the income function, keep income as it is. And then plus 0.11 BT. The price of bus travel is given here as 25 and minus 0.008. The price of auto is 22. Since it has to be replaced with just 22, 1003 zeros are to be omitted. So when you will simplify this, it will give you the final version of the equation is going to be 8.6 plus 0.02 I. This is the quantity demanded function dependent upon the income, and this positive indicates that the quantity demanded of gas and income, they are positive and they have the direct proportion with each other. Okay, now we know that delta Q by change in delta I, it is solved this way.